Hello, welcome to Academy of the Canyons located in sunny Santa Clarita, California. My name is Nikki.
And I'm Xiomara.
And here at Academy of the Canyons, we offer 9th through 12th grade students a unique educational experience that fosters academic and personal success in the high school and college environments. To ensure successful learning for every student, our staff is committed to effective classroom instruction, rigorous curricula, and quality relationships between staff, students, parents, and college partners.
Us, along with other presenters, will take you through how the Battle of the Coral Sea has affected Southern California. First, we'll explore the different research methods and how our students have spent weeks looking through newspaper clippings, visiting museums, and scrolling through hundreds of websites. You will also see that many of our students have interviewed World War II veterans and living witnesses.
We first heard about the project about a month ago, and we were a little concerned that it was not enough time, but we all jumped right into it, and it was right before a break at our school, and so a lot of us got together over the break to start research early, and it was a lot of fun. The class we're doing this with is an elective called 20th Century Wars, and there's two classes at our school that are participating in the project. And one of them is what we call morning track, which means they meet earlier in the day, and the other is afternoon track, which means they meet later in the day. And so there were some communication problems at first because we're two different classes trying to complete a project together and cooperate as a team, even though we don't get to talk to each other very often. But we set up a team drive through Google, and we communicated through email and text message and worked it out. Well, the first thing we did on the project was myself and my friend Xander immediately started looking into our local libraries, where we found a lot of newspaper archives. For example, the Newhall Signal, which we use chiefly in the presentation, was very helpful because it was established in 1820-ish, and they had the backdated issues all the way from then until recently. And so we were able to look through 4 years of history over the course of 2 weeks, and it was really, really cool. And then there were groups that were dedicated to photos and interviews and artifacts. And I know that the artifact groups, they all went on large field trips together and took photos and brought back their research into class. The photograph groups, they contacted local libraries like the newspaper groups did, looking for old photos and for old records. And the interview groups, they started just by calling people, and eventually they were able to find people who either were here at the time the events took place or were involved in the events in some other way. So every day we'd get into class and we'd split off into our groups, and we'd assign group leaders to sort of keep things organized. And the group leaders would say, these are the tasks we have to do today. And they'd set their groups to work on research, on calling people, on even like conducting interviews over the phone with people that they knew. And we were able to just sort of work as a cohesive unit, even though we all separated into different tasks. And we communicated between groups via a large group chat, and basically everyone had a task at all times. It was really cool seeing everyone work together. A great deal of the research we did was actually completely original research, where we traveled somewhere, museums or libraries or some other location, and did our own original research as opposed to searching online for past research. But a good chunk of the research done was also in online databases. For instance, there's California newspaper archives completely uploaded online that work like microfiche but digitally. And we had people working on those resources, and we had a great deal more people who were actually going to locations and talking to people and looking through little cameras into microfiche machines. When we first started researching, one thing became apparent very quickly. That was that planes were a large part of our community at the time. We were mostly ranch land, and so there was a lot of open space for plane testing and manufacturing, and we found out that a lot of the planes that were used in the Coral Sea were the SBD Dauntless planes, and the factory that produced those planes was located like 40 minutes away from where we're sitting right now, which is really cool. And I felt this connection to history that I'd never really been able to experience firsthand before.
My name is Avinash, and I'm a senior at Academy of the Canyons. And throughout the process of this project, we were all split into groups, and my role was to look up pictures in regards to the Coral Sea.
Hi, my name is Farhan. I'm a senior at Academy of the Canyons Middle College High School, and I was really excited when we found out we were going to do this project from our teacher. I found out that we were going to be learning about the Coral Sea and the effects that it had, and that we were also going to be working with other schools.
Hello, my name is Karina Chu, and I'm a junior at Academy of the Canyons. I want to thank the museum for involving us in this exciting opportunity to do this project. My favorite part of this project was going to the American Military Museum and looking at the battleships there.
Hi, my name is Paul Elias. I'm a senior at Academy of the Canyons, and I'd really like to thank the museum for giving us the opportunity to work with other schools, across the United States and across the globe, to produce something that's going to be in such an important museum, and had a major impact on the LA County and the United States itself throughout history. And my favorite part of this was, I guess, really looking into museums around us and finding new information that I didn't know before and didn't learn about in other history classes, and actually getting to look and somewhat experience what they experienced in the wars back then by looking at the ships and the missiles that they used throughout the war.
Hi, I'm Robbie, a senior at Academy of the Canyons, and we'd like to thank the museum for letting us partake in this experience to learn about the Coral Sea and learn about this battle. And my favorite part about this, personally, was going to the museums and seeing all like the missiles and the ships and all the stuff that happened during this war, and I found it very interesting.
Hi, I'm Adine. I go to the Academy of the Canyons, and I'm in 12th grade. And on the first day when we were assigned this assignment, Mr. Malkowski set us up in like different groups. And I personally was put in a group to get like the pictures of some of the museums that, show like what happened during this battle. And it was pretty cool to see like all these pictures. I'm not that old, so I wasn't able to see what happened there. But seeing all these pictures of like the types of like ships they used, the type of like bombs, stuff like that, it was just cool to see all that. And having everyone work as one team to put together this like whole project, it's really cool.
Hello everyone, my name is Julian Drake. I'm in 12th grade. I go to Academy of the Canyons. And for the project for the Coral Sea, I was responsible for creating the website. When we first heard about this project, we broke into groups, and I was personally responsible for organizing the website and allowing people to gain more information on the Coral Sea. We created pictures, we created videos that the people can see on the website as opposed to watching the video also. When you look at the website, you'll see different images of the Coral Sea, and it's just another way of gaining more information. So this project was really helpful for me because I learned about it in 10th grade, but now I really got a better understanding of it, and I would recommend it to anyone who wants to do it next year. So thank you.
Okay, so my name is Farhan. I was in a group of 4, and this is what we created for open house. It's just an assemblage of photos taken from the research that we did and from the battle war on Coral Sea.
The Los Angeles area was not actively involved in the war. However, on February 25th, 1942, the Battle of Los Angeles occurred. On this night, air raid sirens were alarmed and the city was blacked out. The 37th Artillery Brigade began firing machine guns and shells into the sky until 7:21 a.m., when they were alerted that there was no imminent threat. Officials later claimed that it had been a false alarm. Several buildings were damaged and 5 people died, 3 in car accidents and 2 of stress-induced heart attacks, as a result of this supposed enemy attack. This tells us that our area was anxious over the war. They may have not been actively involved in the war, but there was a widespread idea that they would be attacked soon. These war nerves show that the Los Angeles area was extremely apprehensive during World War II.
So this is Marcel Larchelle and Kathy Larchelle, married, and they were both alive during World War II. So what were both of you doing during World War II?
Well, I was a child, and when World War II broke out, my age was 8 years old.
Okay.
And I also was a child, and I was only 6 when the war broke out.
Do you remember any critical events or anything important, anything that sticks out to you when the war first broke out?
Well, the things that happened in our community was there was an organization called a Civil Patrol, and they were people that were older but could not go to war, but their jobs were to, when there was an air raid warning, we had to shut all the lights off in our building or our home, and the whole community was in the dark. And these people went around to make sure that people abide by the law. Then during that time, we had stamps to buy food. And butter and milk was a commodity item that was difficult to get. So you needed certain stamps to buy certain foods, and butter and milk and groceries were in that category, because a lot of those things were sent to the military so they could feed the people at war.
And I was in about the same shoes, only I lived on the California coast. And the minute they heard the air raid signals, everybody had to turn off their lights, and there were many a fight among people who had not turned off the lights. Everybody was very frightened of being bombed again by the Japanese, and I had already lost my father at that time.
Did you know anyone serving in the military at the time?
My father was a commanding officer at Ajo Air Force Base at the time. He was a pilot and a commanding officer.
My father was too old to be in the military, but then the government took people that were too old to go in the military. They sent them to, in this, my father's case, he had to go to Bath, Maine, and work there. He had no choice, building Liberty ships.
What were those?
Those were ships that to carry cargo and everything, and they were building those quite rapidly. And this was in Bath, Maine.
Did you did both of you agree with the Japanese ideals or what they were fighting for?
No.
As a child, I really had no opinion. As I got older, the answer would be no.
Okay. So do you remember any memorable things about how the war affected the community that you lived in?
Well, the food stamp books, yes. In fact, we still have some. And it did affect the community, and that included shoes, which at the time we had a dog that chewed everybody's shoes up. So therefore we had to use our own stamps.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was very frightened. We had no idea what was going on or how long this was going to last.
The only thing I remember is, since I lived in a community that had a lot of single-family homes, plus it also had a farm. And the farmer he had milking cows, and the government would come in and inspect his cows and say, okay, cow 1, cow 7, don't look in good health, we're going to take those. So they would take these cows to use to feed the military.
Do you remember any of your parents' reactions during the war and after the war?
My dad didn't want to work in Bath, Maine, but he had no choice. And the day the war ended and they said, we no longer need you, my father quit. But it did affect him because we had a business that he was going to be building at when the war started. So we couldn't finish it until the war ended.
At the time, were you kind of afraid of what was happening, or did you know what was going on?
For me, no, I had no fear because I was a young child and I grew up during the war. And when the war ended, I was in my teens.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no fears.
And as a young child, the only thing I knew is that I had lost my dad. He was killed at a plane crash.
He was a pilot in the Air
Force. He was a pilot.
How was your experience with the World War II as a child? How has that impacted your outlook on life?
It didn't impact my life at all. I don't think it impacted my life at all. I mean, I was also in the military during towards the end of the Korean conflict, but I never had to go in combat.
Of course, I lost my dad. My uncle served in the Marine Corps during the war, and I don't think it affected my life because I was very young when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always afraid I would lose my uncle also.
So before we wrap up, are there any other stories or things that you remember about that you want to share?
I just know the whole, it was very joyful when it was over. And, life was changed for all of us when it was over. And, everybody was glad that they were able to come home, those that made it, and those that were lost were very mourned.
All I remember is I do remember them dropping the atomic bomb on 2 bombs in Japan. One, it was Hiroshima, I think, and I don't remember the other one.
Nagasaki.
Nagasaki. And that was an awful lot of people that died. Collateral damage in that was terrible because everybody died.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the decision was made to end the war by the Japanese.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing today. That concludes the interview.
Hi, I'm Isavera, and I'm a senior at Academy of the Canyons. Looking at the New Hall Signal, the then unincorporated Santa Clarita Valley's newspaper, it is clear that World War II was not an immediate priority within the community. In fact, until May 1940, the articles appearing in the Signal which discuss the war in Europe are exclusively isolationist. The Valley was far more concerned with the annual rodeo, which monopolized the front page for 3 months every year, than with getting involved in a war that seemed very far away. However, interest in the war grew due to increased production at the Douglas Aircraft Company factory in El Segundo. When World War II began in Europe, the company was tasked with designing the SBD Dauntless, which would go on to sink more ships in the Pacific than any other aircraft in the war. An article in a 1939 issue of the New Hall Signal titled Warbirds recounts sightings of these planes conducting test flights for the U.S. Army in residential areas of the valley. In January of 1940, these test flights morphed into a military flying school, which was granted use for the local field. The Santa Clarita Valley of the 40s had 3 main industries. There were the ranchers, the aircraft factories, and the movies. New Hall was the last holdout of the famous Western aesthetic, which is with its dusty fields and fixation on the town rodeo. It was home to the last real cowboys, and, being so near to Hollywood, became a standard backdrop for Western movies. When the flying school was granted land, it drew consternation from ranchers and directors alike. Signal articles from January, when the land was first granted, all the way through February of 1940, cataloged the conflicting interests of the 3 industries. Even the editors of the Signal weighed in on the debate on January 19, 1940, in the article Props and Mikes, where they expressed their belief that the land argument could be settled peacefully. However, the debate continued until the end of the war, and a permanent flying school was never built. Even still, the SBD Dauntless planes that came out of the school played an important role in the war. The economic boost they granted Newhall's economy is evident in the dramatic shifts of news articles from exclusive isolationist to radically interventionist after May of 1940, when the production at the El Segundo factory really took off. Suddenly, the political section of the Signal was populated with articles titling things like "Roosevelt was right," "The decision approaches," "We are next." This new interventionist attitude would serve Newhall well for the rest of the war. Though the planes created in El Segundo brought money into the valley, they also brought the military, who began their occupation of the Santa Clarita Valley, which was regarded as a military target due to the flying school after Pearl Harbor. Despite the military occupation, residents' number one priority, which remained the rodeo, was given the go-ahead after much debate between local and military officials. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Theater, planes built in town were engaged in combat. Americans fighting in the Battle of the Coral Sea utilized SBD-3 planes, every single one of which were manufactured in Los Angeles and tested on Newhall ranch land. The very same factory which produced these planes, the Douglas Aircraft Plant, also produced another iconic symbol of World War II, Rosie and the Riveter. Rosie the Riveter refers collectively to women who built planes in World War II while men were overseas. Though this progressive new role for women raised some eyebrows, the residents' agriculturally based Santa Clarita Valley were no strangers to women in the workforce. Women worked on ranches just often as men. Even still, an article entitled "Writer Depicts Women's Roles in the War Days to Come," written by a woman named Caroline Churchill, which reflected on these social changes, was featured in the Signal. Both men and women of the Valley were eager to support the war effort in any way they could. When a draft was called, young men registered in spades. Those who could not fight in the war volunteered for manufacturing jobs and the Red Cross. They served as air wardens and bought defense stamps. The war brought an end to the cowboy area in Newhall. The quiet, rural town with its quiet, sprawling fields was replaced with the buzzing aircraft and a booming economy.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm a senior at Academy of the Canyons, and in the process of collecting artifacts, we were tasked with the field research and went out to several museums. After documenting several instruments of warfare, we narrowed down the artifacts to some key pieces of equipment that were used in the Battle of the Coral Sea and other major battles. First, there was the Japanese Zero that we found in the Plains of Fame Museum in Chino, an actual model used during World War II. This particular Zero also happened to be the museum's only fully authentic flyable example in the world. Completed in May 1943, Zero number 61129 was the 2,375th artifact of its kind to come off the Nakajima production line and first assigned to the 261st Japanese Naval Corps on the Japanese home island of Horseshoe. Shortly after the reassignment, the U.S. Navy's task force swarmed ashore the base and captured the plane. All of the captured equipment was offloaded at San Diego, California, and 4 of the Zeros were put back into flying condition, with 2 being turned over to the Army Air Force and 2 being turned over to the Navy. It has been involved in numerous movie scenes since its restoration and reflight in 1978. Second, we discovered several amphibious tanks that have since been refurbished and used as rentals for several movies industries. The Higgins boat, found specifically at the American Military Museum, is a 36-foot-long wooden landing craft used to land and retrieve personnel or equipment during the amphibious operations. These Higgins boats were considered invaluable to the D-Day landings in June 6, 1944. Its capacity was for 39 troops and 13 crew members. There was also an assemblage of equipment parts like fuel cells, which were no longer in use, but still kept in high condition. Even little parts like these were allowed for large mechanics to function properly and make differences in the war efforts. In essence, the research compiled allowed our students to have a broad perspective of the equipment that made physical combat possible. The field research also allowed the students to achieve a more personal connection to the war, mostly because the equipment was much more apparent and real.
Hi, I'm Carrie Brink, and I also go to Academy of the Canyons. So, when the war started, Los Angeles County was the hub for airplane manufacturers. These manufacturing companies hired people regardless of gender and ethnicity. Black and white women worked side by side to build the aircrafts for men in the Army. Manufacturers needed as much help as they can to build planes and other materials for the Army. Despite this, discrimination still prevailed in the area. On February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which called for the internment of thousands of people in the Japanese ancestry in the United States. Certain areas were described as military zones, and many of the Japanese ancestry had to leave the region. They were placed in internment camps all over the West Coast, including California. 37,000 Japanese individuals lived in Los Angeles prior to Pearl Harbor. Japanese families were driven out of their homes and placed into internment camps all over the state of California. Many were forced to leave the country, and when they returned, they did not have anywhere to live. Most settled in the east of Little Tokyo, which is Boyle Heights, and stayed there until they were replaced by Latino families.
My name is Carl Diekman.
And where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Little town in Indiana, Rushville. Spent my life there. Graduated from high school. I'm a baker by trade. My grandfather and my father were bakers. So I was raised up in a bakery. Nice. Anyway, after graduating in 1940, I worked for my dad. And then World War II broke out. It was about time to get drafted, and I didn't want to get called for draft. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps. I didn't know at the time, but two of my classmates also enlisted in the Marine Corps. So my mother and father took the three boys to Indianapolis to be sworn in. We left there to Paris Island, North Carolina.
For boot camp.
Yeah. I forget how many weeks we had training, but it went pretty fast. They broke you down being a civilian to what they want as a military person. I was sent to Norfolk, Virginia, at Portsmouth Navy base. And then my two buddies were sent, I forget where they went. Anyway, I spent part of my time on guard duty and my days off. From guard duty, we'd done maintenance work like cleaning up the compound and where we got our rakes and everything. It was a little shed, and the bakery was right next to it. So I went in and talked to the master sergeant about working for him. And okay, so then on my days off from guard duty, I'd go to the bakery and work. Then I got transferred altogether to the bakery. We had our own squad room, so I spent a lot of time in the bakery. And went on Liberty one time and stopped at a little restaurant, get something to eat before I went back to the barracks. Waitress, very nice, asked if I could take her home. And she said no. So about ready to leave, they blew air raid sirens. Everything was blacked out, and she came back to the table and said, "You're taking me home." Okay, that was the start of my marriage life. We dated quite a while, and then got married. That was in 1943. Spent a little more time at Norfolk Navy Base, then was transferred to Camp Pendleton. That was the 5th Marine Division. Got assigned to barracks, and the tech sergeant come walking through, asked me whether I wanted to work in the galley or the field. I said, well, work in the galley. So spent my time working in the mess hall, making pies and cakes and bread. Then war got a little more intense, and we were shipped out to Hawaii. Camp Tarawa done more training. They set up a bakery. We baked bread for the unit, take a little bus and go on Liberty for the weekend. The little town, I forget it. Anyway, we went through a sugar refinery where they take sugar cane and processed it, and they'd ship it to the States for more refinery, and it was quite an experience.
Hello, I'm a junior at Academy of the Canyons, and my name is John Horning. Another point of view can be found in the movie The Battle of the Coral Sea, directed by Paul Wendkos. The film details the journey of a submarine crew tasked with spying on the Japanese submarines before they surrendered themselves. As prisoners of war, they form alliances with the Australians and an interpreter from the Imperial Japanese Army. The movie focuses on the experience within a Japanese prisoner of war camp rather than the battle. Thus, the new point of view. The movie, filmed off the Los Angeles coast, shows the Australian-American alliances in the prisoner of war camp, where the captured submarine crew and the Australians fight to escape the camp. This movie showed that while the Battle of the Coral Sea may not have had direct effects on Southern California, the effects of the war still ripple through the modern day.
In our research, we noticed a lot of anxiety from the people living in the town, and that their interest in the war mostly had to do with things that directly affected them, like the economy and the airplanes that were being manufactured in town. What they didn't focus on, and what we believe communities like ours need to focus on in the future to prevent more wars, is the global community. When we look at war, we need to look at it not as a large event that a small town is part of, but as a large event that many small towns are part of. And so we'd like to thank the museum for allowing us to consider the perspectives of not only our little town, but our little town as it connects to all the other little towns which are completing presentations just like ours. We'd also like to thank all of the students at our school who participated in the project, all of the veterans we've spoken to, who've allowed us a first-hand perspective on the war. and all of the other researchers and historians we've talked to in this process.